Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Five Questions with the Paulist. Today, we're heading out to Boston, and we're going to talk to our guest today about conflict. He's co-authored this here amazing book with his colleague, Dr. Joel Salinas, who's a neurologist. It's a toolkit for bringing people together in a conflicted world. It's called Conflict Resilience. Negotiating disagreement without giving up or giving in. We're happy to welcome Bob Bordone, senior fellow at Harvard Law School, founder of the Harvard Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program, and the founder of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. But most importantly, he's on the advisory board for the Paulist Initiative on toxic polarization, and he's a longtime parishioner at the Paulist Center in Boston. With a resume like that, what more can we ask for? Hey, Bob, how are you?
Deacon Mike, it's so nice to be here, and thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's get right into it. Question number one. For someone who hasn't read your book yet, how would you define conflict resilience as a concept, and how's that different from conflict resolution?
Great. Yeah, I mean, we make a very intentional point of saying conflict resilience is not just some fancy words sitting in for conflict resolution. When we talk about conflict resilience, what we really mean is the ability to sit with the discomfort of our disagreements, even when resolution or problem solving or agreement isn't necessarily possible. So it's a combination of both being able to listen with genuine curiosity, what we call deep listening, and also an ability to really speak your own experience to assert effectively in a way that is authentic, non-avoidant, but also in a way that increases the likelihood that the other side can actually hear what you're saying. So what we would say is that conflict resilience is actually prerequisite to conflict resolution. That is to say, if you don't have that capacity to enter into the disagreement in a constructive way, then you can't really get to resolution. What you end up with either is avoidance, right, running away, or alternatively, uh, kind of unproductive fighting and escalation, which I think unfortunately we're seeing a lot of, certainly at the national level, but unfortunately I think we see it even in church world, in our families, where holidays are highly stressful. So conflict resilience we think of as a very essential, just individual human skill for being able to navigate a diverse and complex world.
Gotcha. And so, question two is along the same lines. You think conflict is not always a bad thing. So, do you have suggestions for how people might embrace conflict instead of avoiding conflict?
Yeah, I mean, one of the fundamental premises is that conflict in itself is natural and good and a source of vitality and vibrance, right? We see conflict all over scripture. Certainly, we see it come up whenever you bring more than a single person together. So, the reframe, I think, is really important because if we think conflict is bad, then we're going to spend all this time avoiding it. So first thing I would just say, right, is actually getting people to reframe their own assumption about conflict. That is to say that conflict offers us a chance to connect. That if you think about your best relationships, the moment that a relationship gets tested and goes deeper is the moment when somebody says, "Well, I'm not sure I see it that way,"
Yeah.
or "I think I might disagree with you." And if you can get through that, it also means that all the other yeses are real yeses
Yeah.
and not just placating ones. So the mind shift, I think, is really an important piece of it. I think the other piece of this is that there's just a fair amount of work that we can do related to how our brains function that we can retrain to make that fear of conflict go down, because I think our brains work in this what we call five Fs. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or fester, as a self-protective mode. And there are times when that makes sense. But for most of like the relationships we have with sister, brother, boss, coach, teen, it's not an existential issue. We're going to be in relationship with them. And so the more we can take a pause,
Yeah.
And that may sound just actually like a cute or nice, but there is validated brain research that taking a pause and naming what we're experiencing to ourselves, we call name it to tame it, that those moves actually empower us to be more purposeful and intentional when we enter into the conflict, right? And I think, in Catholic terms, we might call that prayer or meditation, or just even, using our, what might be something that some of us might do, right? Like I might just do a short little, a short little prayer, right? Like, so for me, it might be just lifting up something to the Blessed Virgin to like give me some, peace in this moment.
Yeah.
Those moves are actually do change our ability to enter into the conflict in a constructive way.
Gotcha. All right, so question three. The Paulists and many in the church today are currently working on addressing toxic polarization. You're at the center of that, right? But what do you do when the news of the day raises immediate justice issues that become or that prevent the work of bringing people together in the first place, right? So does the need for justice sometimes have to come first before we can get to any of this?
Yeah, I love this is a tough and important question. I think a few things come to my mind. One is that there are certainly moments and times when it's very important to speak boldly or to act boldly. Um, but I also would distinguish, and I actually would make an argument that um, the act of dialogue, the act of engaging across the proverbial aisle, or with those that we might see as enemies, or even those who we might see as dehumanizing, is itself an act in favor of justice.
Hmm.
Um, and I think this is one of the reasons why I'm really drawn to this work within our church, because there's something about the teaching of the dignity of the individual, which challenges us in a very profound way to see that person who may be spewing something that we think is unjust or hateful or unchristian, to see essentially their dignity as a human being. That doesn't mean that we roll over
Right.
at all. And conflict resilience is not about rolling over. But it does mean that we have to cultivate that curiosity. And if we're not feeling it, right, this is, I think, where prayer comes in, right? What does it mean to love and be in relationship with an enemy
Yeah.
or a perceived enemy? So I think that there's a way in which this work done well and done prayerfully is itself in the direction of justice. Last thing I'll just say about this is I think all of us need a degree of conflict resilience to be effective in day-to-day lives and preserve and build relationships. And also, though, each of us may have a somewhat different calling as to where we land in that, in terms of what we are maybe most prioritizing in our work.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Yeah. It reminds me a little Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental, right?
Oh my gosh, I use that clip when I use that clip in my lecture on listening.
That's funny.
Be curious, not judgmental. It's a great clip.
Exactly. All right. Along the same lines, question four. You're speaking with a family member who recently stopped going to mass because of issues that have been raised by the presidential election recently. What words of hope or what things would you have for them to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's inviting them, first of all, for yourself, coming at this from a place of curiosity and a place of empathy to try to understand um, what from their experience has made this shift. To go also beyond just what might be a quote unquote factual conversation about arguments or things that happened. I think if we get to the level of what are the emotions that are coming up, what are the fears that are coming up, that often is a point of, I think, connection. A few months ago, I was giving a talk at a parish, and afterwards, somebody came up to me. Actually, it was a couple who came up to me, and they said that they had a child who had stopped going to church, an adult child, and the child said to them, "If you ever bring up God or the parish again, I never want to talk to you again."
Wow.
Yeah, it was very stark and very And these people were deeply saddened by that. But they were wondering, right, how is there some way to be in conversation around this? And I think, at least initially, I think it has to come from a place of just genuine curiosity to understand the perspective, not for the point of persuasion, not for the point of instruction, not for the point of showing the error of ways. And of course, that's harder to do if there's a history
Yeah.
of the other person seeing you as coming at them. Um, Last thing I'll say about this, right? Sometimes the way into a conversation is to say, I know we've talked about this in the past and it hasn't gone well. And I actually don't want to talk about that, but I wonder if you'd be willing to have a conversation about what your experience of those conversations has been like.
Hmm.
What has been hard for you about them? What has, yeah, just how do you experience them? Because that is might be really inviting. And often I think there's a shared experience, which is one of pain and sadness and frustration. Um, the conversation might end there.
Yeah.
It might also be if each side has some interest in it going better, to then say, what would it look like for you to do this differently? So it's kind of going meta
Yeah.
on the conversation, right?
Yeah. And both places, right?
And both, yeah,
Both the person asking the question, the person who's suffering because of it,
yeah,
Yeah, that's good stuff.
yeah.
All right, finally, question five. It's a zombie apocalypse. So
Aha.
who are three saints that you'd like fighting on your side against the zombies?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm picking three people. One is most assertively, definitely a saint. The other two are still alive, but I think they live saintly lives. So the saint for me, without a doubt, is the Blessed Virgin.
Hmm.
She is my go-to for comfort and consolation, but also strength, because there is this kind of fierce gentleness,
Yeah.
and she has been a companion for me. So without a doubt, the other person uh, uh, is a person who is alive. It's my chaplain from college. Her name is Susan, and has always been just this person of actually deep listening and deep encouragement, but always uh, strong and encouraging me, bring out like the best aspects of who I could be. And the last person I don't know personally, although I feel like I have a sense of, and it's Pope Francis.
Oh,
Um, and um, and for me, it is that combination of courage, um, also compassion, and everything that I've heard about him is also sense of humor.
yeah.
Um, that while so much is very serious and heavy, he somehow conveys what I imagine to Jesus to be, which is also that um, a lightness and a humor
Yeah.
and a not taking of himself too seriously, even though, he is the Holy Father.
Right. Yeah, a little bit of self-deprecation almost too, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So those are my three.
That'd be great. Yeah, and I don't think so many people pick Pope Francis. So that's great.
Yeah, no, I think yeah, I mean, he's just somebody who the more I read about and the more I read his writing, the more I just think, we have had, a profound gift in him. And hopefully that will be with us for some more time. But certainly what we can learn from him, I think, will be with the church.
Sure. Bob, this has been great. The book again, Conflict Resilience. You can get that wherever you buy your books. And Bob, keep doing the good work that you're doing. We continue to pray for you and all the work that you're doing, especially with anti-polarization work with the Paulists.
Thanks, Deacon Mike. It was really fun being with you, and keep doing your great work as well.
Absolutely. This has been Five Questions of the Paulist. I'm Deacon Mike Hayes. He is Bob Bordone. We'll see you all again next time.